Okay, so this is the Bible study for Exodus chapter 12, and the scripture says, "The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, 'This month is to be for you the first month of your year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. If any household is too small for a whole lamb, they must share one with their nearest neighbor. Having taken into account the number of people there are, you are to determine the amount of lamb needed in accordance with what each person will eat. The animals you choose must be year-old males without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all of the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the door frames of the houses where they eat the lambs. That same night, they are to eat the meat roasted over the fire, along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or boiled in water, but roasted over a fire with the head, legs, and internal organs. Do not leave any of it till morning. If some is left till morning, you must burn it. This is how you are to eat it, with your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. On that same night, I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. This is a day you are to commemorate. For the generations to come, you shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance. For 7 days you are to eat bread made without yeast. On the first day, remove the yeast from your houses. For whoever eats anything with yeast in it from the first day through the seventh must be cut off from Israel. On the first day, hold a sacred assembly, and another one on the seventh day. Do not work at all on these days except to prepare food for everyone to eat. That it all that it is all that is all you may do. Celebrate the festival of unleavened bread, because it was on this very day that I brought your divisions out of Egypt. Celebrate this day as a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. In the first month, you are to eat bread made without yeast, from the evening of the 14th day until the evening of the 21st day. For 7 days, no yeast is to be found in your houses, and anyone, whether foreigner or native born, who eats anything with yeast in it must be cut off from the community of Israel. Eat nothing made with yeast wherever you live. You must eat unleavened bread. Then Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, Go at once and select the animals for your families to slaughter the Passover lamb and slaughter the Passover lamb. Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it into the blood in the basin, and put some blood on the top and on both sides of the door frame. None of you shall go out of the door of your house until morning. When the Lord goes through the land and strikes down the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the top and sides of the door frame and will pass over that doorway. And he will not permit the destroyer to enter your house and strike you down. Obey these instructions as a lasting ordinance for you and your descendants. When you enter the land that the Lord will give you as he promised, observe this ceremony. And when your children ask you, What does this ceremony mean to you? Then tell them, It is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt, and spared our homes when he struck down the Egyptians. Then the people bowed down and worshiped. The Israelites did just what the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from Israel, from firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock as well. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the Egyptians got up during the night, and there was loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. So remember that you can download a PDF copy of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive. And we're doing the study for Exodus chapter 12, verses 1 through 30. And number one says, what happened in our last Bible study in Exodus 11? God said this will be the last plague that he brings on Egypt. That's true. B, God said that after this, Pharaoh will drive Israel out completely. That's true. C, God said he was going to strike the firstborn of everyone in Egypt except the Israelites. That's true. D, God said he would make a clear distinction between Egypt and Israel so that they would know that God is doing this and that his hand was with Israel. And that's also true. So in last week's text, we had, let me just kind of go back to that. We were told about the plague of the firstborn, but it was a very short text. It was only 10 verses, and we didn't find out anything about it. And so this text gives us a lot more detail, but also kind of is an interesting text because it's a balance between detail about the Passover itself and what they're to do that day and that year. But it's also saying, and oh, by the way, this is going to be a lasting ordinance. This is something you're going to celebrate every year. So what I'm going to do is so significant that I want you to celebrate it every year by going through the same process that I'm telling you about now. And the unleavened bread and the slaughter of the lamb without defect. All of this you're going to do every year on these dates. And this is going to be the first year because this is, it's symbolic. This is the first year of your freedom, or the first month. This is going to be your first month of your year because this is the month I gave you freedom. It's the beginning. It's new life. It's a new year. So this is going to be the beginning of your year. On the 14th day through the 21st day, you're going to celebrate this every year. And basically, you're going to do some things that are going to seem strange, but they wouldn't seem strange if they don't seem strange if you're getting ready to travel. So all the stuff seems like you're getting ready for a journey because you are. But then every year after that, you're going to do the same thing as if you're getting ready for a journey, and your kids are going to ask about it. So here's another one of those moments in the Old Testament where we find out a festival or even some sort of a monument is set up for the purpose of it being strange, so that kids will ask, why do we do this? So that you can tell them the reason that we do this is because this is what we did when God delivered us from Egypt. And all of it has meaning and purpose. So we're going to go through this a little. I don't want to give it all away at the beginning, but all of it has meaning and purpose when you think about the idea of urgently eating a meal, sort of in a watch night type situation. When God is about to drive you out, he's putting into place all of this stuff. He's going to save you. He's going to the plague of the firstborn is falling on Egypt. And so you need to be ready to go because they're going to want you gone. So you're going to eat it prepared. So that's an act of faith, right? In and of itself. You're going to eat it prepared to leave because you're going to go. And then from here on out, you're going to eat it in the same way, remembering how you had to be ready to go. And that's also an act of faith. So I think I didn't just answer number one. I think I just went ahead and taught most of this Bible study, but I think we'll review it all. Number two, what does God say to Moses and Aaron in 12:1 and 2? He says, mostly in 2, because number 1 says, verse 1 says, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt. 2 was what he said. This month is to be for you the first month of your year. This is going to be the first month of your year. And the second part says, why does this matter and what is the significance? See, I already talked the Bible study. It's like a new year. It's new life. It's a new beginning. And so why is this going to be your first month of the year? It's not just because it's random. It's not just because some guy set it up at some time. This is the first month of the year for you because this is where it all began. You were in slavery and now you have new life and now you have freedom. And so it's the beginning. And so every year you're going to celebrate the beginning. When you celebrate, so even today in America, we celebrate New Year's and it's a new beginning. But we have no sort of reason for that, or we have no consideration of why January is a new year instead of June. The numbers turn over in our calendar. But for Israel, there was a reason for that to be in the first month of the year, for that to be their New Year's. And the reason was because that was the first month that they had freedom. That was when God delivered them. And so there was significance to that. Number 3 says, what instructions did God give Israel in 12:3 through 11? A says, on the 10th day of the month, every man is to take a lamb for his household, or they can share it with their neighbor if their family is small. So there's to be no waste. They're to prepare exactly the amount that they need. Choose the right one that's the right size for them to eat it all. And anything that's left, they're going to burn up. And if the family is so small, for whatever reason, there's only 2 in the household or 3 in the household, and they can't eat this whole lamb, then they're to find their nearest neighbor and share with them, and then select the lamb that's the appropriate size for the people, because there's not to be any waste, and nothing can be saved. So, we have refrigerators and coolers. So if I want to save something, I put it in the refrigerator. They didn't have that back then. I have not only a cooler, but I now have a refrigerator that I can plug into my car outlet, and it keeps things cold while my car's running on a long trip. And so when I'm driving on a long trip, I plug in the refrigerator. We can load up loose meat and bread and whatever. You may think that's a luxury, but I think the first trip that I took it, I saved the money on fast food or whatever else we would have eaten, or spoiled food because our ice ran out in our cooler. I saved the amount that I spent on the thing. And so I keep waters in it. Anyway, we have that today. They didn't have that. Why was it important that they ate just enough? They didn't want to waste, and they were going on a journey, and they didn't have time to cure this, make jerky out of it, or whatever they did to preserve meat for time. So this meal is going to be a meal that's eaten, that is not going to be saved. Like if you're staying in a hotel, you go out to eat, you have leftovers, but you have no refrigerator in your hotel, so you got to waste the leftovers. So this, which I don't have to do either, by the way, anymore, since I have that in my car, that refrigerator. But that's a whole nother story. I'll stop with that. But they didn't have that, so they're going to prepare only enough to eat, and everything else is going to be burned up. You had to burn it up because if the blood and the extra meat sat there, it had to be like, that's the only way to keep it from rotting and the germs spreading and all of that. I don't think they were making sausage out of it back then. Make some bologna, grind up the bones, whatever. Just gross some people out. So New Year, and they were to get the lamb the right size, just enough, and they were selected on the 10th day. C, they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and the tops of the door frames of the houses where they eat the lambs. Now, I think, according to Jewish law and how they usually treated blood, this would be the thing that would be really outside of their norm, outside of their comfort zone. Why would you paint any kind of animal blood on the doorposts? Uh, all the burning up of everything else to prevent disease or rotting or whatever seems to be undone by this. Um, but they had to be obedient because, and now we're going to talk about this, but it says that God is distinguishing, and that's what we talked about in number 1 from last week. God is distinguishing between Israel and Egypt. But I want to make this really clear, and I talked about this a few weeks ago in my message, because one of the other plagues had a delineation where Pharaoh was told the plague of hail. Pharaoh was told to bring everybody in out of the, you got a chance, and he didn't do it. Some of the people that feared the word of the Lord went ahead and did it. Some of the officials that knew, and they were obedient. And we said, this is going to carry over into the plague of the firstborn. And that is God. Yes, God is delineating between Egypt and Israel, but really God is delineating between those who were obedient to him and did what he said and those who were not. Now, for the most part, those lines were drawn down the lines of Egypt didn't care about the word of the Lord and Israel did. But let me just say that it's important to understand that if an Israelite didn't do what God said, if an Israelite said, "Oh, this stuff's crazy. Why would I do that? No, I'm not going to paint blood on my door," then they would have fallen under the plague of the firstborn, just like Egypt did, because it was about their obedience. And it's really important for us to understand this, because we think God is different in the New Testament and obedience is no longer required because we just got grace. But obedience is how we show our faith, and we're saved by grace through faith. This not of ourselves, not by works, that anyone should boast. And so people quote that, but they forget that faith, it is by faith that they painted on the doorpost. So the grace is applied. This is grace applied to Israel, and it's applied to those who had the faith in God, the belief in his word to do what he said. And so they didn't earn his unmerited favor. It was unmerited favor. They didn't earn it, but it came upon those who trusted God and feared the word of the Lord and did what he said. And so it wasn't that it was earned by that action. It came to those who had faith, and that faith also produced action. And so it's really important for us to understand that, because still today, God, salvation is by grace through faith, and faith is accompanied by deeds. And Paul said, James said, you show me your faith without deeds, and I'll show you my faith by what I do. And so we understand that faith is displayed in our obedience. And so God, salvation comes by faith in Jesus Christ. Still today, that hasn't changed. God hasn't changed. Now, he may not be telling us to paint our doorposts anymore, but he is telling us to apply the blood of the Lamb to our lives, to put our trust in him and do his will, because that designates us. It shows us to be the Christians. It shows us to be the people of God. The people of God are the ones that take on the marking of God. And that marking comes with obedience. Okay. So that same night they are to eat meat roasted over the fire along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Now again, the bread made without yeast. If you've ever seen bread with yeast, I mean, I don't know how many of us still eat yeast rolls. Most of the yeast rolls that I eat, I mean, we've made yeast rolls. I bought the little jar of yeast and we've done that. I bought it and I made pizza crust that rises and stuff like that, because I really like that. The one thing that I found is that yeast is hard. It's hard to deal with. It's really easy to what's a living organism. It's unpredictable. And so when we pull the frozen yeast rolls, the freezing kind of stops them from rising, but we pull them out and you got to time it just right, because if you don't let them rise enough, then beforehand, if you don't see that, then you put them in the oven and they're just little tiny balls. They don't rise right in the oven either. If you let them rise too much, then you got a hard surface on your rolls and it's not as soft and fluffy, and it's just hard to deal with. And so mostly we use the frozen ones these days. But you know, in the old days, they had the bread with yeast, and then they divide it, and you kind of have a one that you take a piece of, okay, we're going to take this piece off and we're going to bake this, but we still have a piece, and then you divide it and you divide it. And but we had some frozen yeast rolls that came into the food bank recently, and somebody took a picture the next morning and said that the refrigerator door of the food bank was open and food was spoiling and stuff like that. Who left the door open? And I looked at the picture and I saw spilled out on the floor was a bag of frozen yeast rolls that had been thawed. And when they thawed, exploded out of the package, and it's very, very possible that they were already thawed when we got them and somebody thought, oh, it'll be okay, but put it, and they opened the door. They burst out of the freezer or the refrigerator because they were thawed and they weren't frozen, and so the yeast was exploding. And can you imagine, without refrigeration or without a freezer, how it would be to have yeast when you're going on a vacation and you're going to be walking and you got this bag with yeast bread in it, and it's rising and it's rising, and you don't know it's in your backpack, I guess, and it's rising and it's bursting up, and somebody's tapping you on the shoulder and saying you're about to explode, and then it explodes and all over the face of the guy behind you. And I have a wild imagination, but that's what would happen. They can't travel with, they need to, and scripture in the New Testament says a little yeast leaveneth the whole bunch. In other words, yeast multiplies. So here's the problem is, if you need unleavened bread, if you need to be able to um on your journey, because you can't have it exploding in your backpack, if you need unleavened bread, then you need to get rid of the yeast early. So they're told, get all the yeast out of your house ahead of time, because you're going to have exploding backpacks and the rolls are trying to get out of your bag because you got a little yeast that multiplied in there. So you need to get it out early, to the point where you're sure before you even get there on this journey, you're sure that yeast is gone. So what I'm saying is that these regulations sound crazy down the road, when, why are we getting, what's the problem with it? Sounds very legalistic, right? What's the problem uh with this month, and we can't have yeast and we got to get it out the first day, and then we're making bread without yeast on these 7 days? What's this all about? And the question, it's so that they'll ask the question, so that somebody who's never, the kids who've never experienced this before, who haven't heard the story, say, this is crazy, why are we doing this? I say, imagine the exploding backpacks. If we would have had yeast rolls in our backpacks when we left Egypt. So we had to get rid of all of the yeast. Okay. And God told us, this is how you're going to do it. Be ready to leave. Tuck your tunic into your, or whatever it is, tuck your robe into your belt. Okay. So that you're ready to go. You're ready to travel. and don't get rid of all the yeast so that you're ready. And you're telling your kids, yeah, it sounds crazy, right? But there was a reason we had to do it when we were leaving Egypt, and God delivered us. And so we do it every year now so that we remember what it was like and why we had to do that. And so that's what's going on here. Letter E, do not leave any of it till morning. If some of it is left till morning, you must burn it. Um, F, you are to eat it with your cloaks tucked into your belts, their sandals on their feet, and their staff in their hand, and they're to eat fast. This is the name of the game right here. This is my favorite festival, Eat Fast Festival. Um, very popular today. My phone keeps ringing. Um, so um, so they're to eat it ready to go. That's what this whole thing is about. And it doesn't make sense, 30 years or 100 years later when they're still celebrating it, unless they're able to tell the story and say, yeah, we're doing this because that's what we had to do back then. And this is what it was like the night that God delivered us from Egypt. Number 4, what are these instructions? Why are these instructions significant? A, I don't know. Sounds like a lot of rule following to me. B, because God is going to deliver them and they need to be ready to leave. Yes, I've already talked about all this, I think. C, these instructions become the same for the commemoration of the event later so that they would remember what it was like to be ready for the deliverance God would bring. I've already talked about all that, so I'm not going to continue. Number 5, what does God tell them in verses 12 and 13? On the same night, I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on the gods, all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be the sign on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. So he tells them what to do and that they're to, so they paint the house that they eat in and they're to stay there waiting to go. So they're ready to go. They're prepared and they're eating fast and painting the doorpost and not going. If they ate at their neighbor's house because they prepared one lamb, they're staying over there tonight. Paint the doorpost. And he knows where they and protects those houses. And number 6, what would the, what is the significance of continuing celebration of this event into the future according to verses 24 through 26? So that your children will ask. It's a celebration. When your children ask, what does this ceremony mean to you? Then tell them it is the Passover sacrifice. Let me just tell you this, that we have rituals still today. I mean, we have the Lord's Supper, which was the first time it was celebrated when Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me. It was a Passover feast. So we have the Lord's Supper still today, but when somebody asks us what it means, I'm not sure we're going to tell the story of the Passover. I really do believe we're going to tell the story of um, of the Lord's Supper. And so we need to know why it's significant. We take it in a weird way. We take the little crackers. Usually, when we celebrate it, we celebrate it with unleavened bread. I've seen people with leavened bread celebrate it because it's more available today or it seems more normal to us. But there's something too. Why do we celebrate it with something different? Because this represents the Passover, but the deliverance we've got is from the blood of a new lamb once for all. Number 7, what did the Israelites do according to verses 27 and 28? It says, then tell them, um, in verse 28, it should be mainly 28. The Israelites did just what the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron. And that's important because, as I already said, he delineated them Egypt from Israel, but really those who had faith in God to obey his word from those who did not. And what happened in verses 29 and 30? At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, to the firstborn of all the livestock as well. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the Egyptians got up during the night, and there was loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without somebody dead. And so what it is God followed through with what he said, and he recognized the obedience of his people and the disobedience of Egypt.